What makes an anime dark? Is it gruesome deaths, unsettling violence, or just overall general dark themes? Well, if it's any of those things, and in my opinion, it's all of those things, well then I would argue that Naruto is one of the darkest popular anime to ever be created. See, because, well, yes, when you think about Naruto, you probably don't think about its dreariest and darkest moments, and rather you focus on the highest highs that universe delivers. When you really flip through Naruto on a chapter-by-chapter basis, you realize just how dark of a story it can become. See, whether it's children being squished to death, entire clans being eradicated in the blink of an eye, or multiple incredibly horrific torture methods being used on both the good and bad guys, Naruto is filled with some of the darkest moments we've ever been given in mega shonen anime. And today, I want to go over those moments, because today we're talking Naruto's top 10 darkest moments, ranked and explained. But before we get to ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for an additional NC Hammer 23 video every single week, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We had to miss 1 week because I'm here in beautiful, sunny, not sunny at all, it's actually pouring Vancouver with all of my friends, so I'm going to be doing a double episode when I get back to the States. I apologize if it looks like I'm recording this inside of a haunted bedroom. I objectively kind of am. We're staying at the Fairmont Hotel, which is, I think, the oldest building in Vancouver. But after this, it's off to Whistler for more skiing. But enough about the darkest, dreariest city I've ever interacted with. Let's get into some of the darkest and dreariest moments in anime I've ever interacted with. Now, before we start off with this list, I want to lay down a couple of rules to help paint the picture of how this list was made. Obviously, when making a list ranking the darkest moments in Naruto, there's no objective criteria to follow. A moment could be substantially darker to you than it is to me. However, I'm ranking these moments not only based off the gruesomeness and overall brutality of the scenes, but I'm also going to be taking into account their plot relevance. Well, yes, there are tons of gruesome and dark moments all throughout Naruto. A lot of them happen to no-name characters, and therefore, if you can't remember the scene, it's not all that dark, now is it? So, while inherently this list is going to be pretty heavily subjective, I'm going to try to approach it from the most objective standpoint possible. Now, with all that said, let's dive into our list with our number 10 spot. Because coming up at number 10 on our list, ranking Naruto's darkest moments, we have Gaara killing a Rain Village Genin. Listen, long before Gaara was a potential love interest for Naruto and the youngest ever Kazekage, he was a walking, living weapon with serious anger issues. And those anger issues were put on full display during the Forest of Death arc. See, while all of us as the readers and viewers of Naruto's anime and manga had a pretty solid feeling that something was off with Gaara, it wasn't until the Forest of Death arc came along that those suspicions were confirmed. See, because even though the Forest of Death part of the Chunin exams was supposed to have a no-killing rule, when a group of Rain Village Genin decide that the Sand Village trio are easy pickings to possibly get a Earth or Heaven scroll, we see one of the first fights of the Forest of Death arc, and by far and away, one of the most brutal. See, to survive being raised in the village hidden in the rain in the era that these Genin had to, we know now, knowing everything we know about the rise of the Akatsuki and what it has to do with the village hidden in the rain's history, that these Genin were probably some of the strongest Genin in the exam. On top of this, these Genin from the Hidden Rain Village looked substantially older than a lot of the Genin from Konoha, and therefore when they came across the path of the Sand siblings, even though we didn't know their names and only one of them had a unique design, it was relatively safe for us to assume that they were going to at least give the Sand siblings something close to a fight, which would have been nice considering the fact that the Sand siblings have been doing nothing but mouthing off since they made their way into Konoha. However, unfortunately for us, the people who wanted to see Gaara and Kankuro and Temari get a little taste of their own medicine, these Rain Village Genin were really nothing special, at least relative to the Sand siblings, because when one of them decided that Gaara with his petite little frame was easy pickings, launching his iconic umbrella and Senbon based attack at the Sand siblings, which is really just kind of like a twin rising dragon from 1010. I mean, he literally just throws an umbrella in the air and a bunch of Senbon come out of the umbrella, and Gaara's able to stop all of them with his sand incredibly easily after blocking the attack, probably without any input on his own on account of the fact that his mother's sand can protect him. Gaara asks this Rain Village Shinobi if that's all that he can do, which apparently, yeah, it is. Thus, Gaara takes it upon himself to show this Rain Village Shinobi what real power looks like, grabbing him with his sand. And while this Rain Village Genin is being grabbed with Gaara's sand, he's screaming for his life. However, Gaara doesn't listen to his complaints, as once he covers his Genin's body in sand, he, for the first time we ever see, uses sand burial. And while sand burial has always been an incredibly gruesome attack, this is by far and away the most gruesome depiction of a sand burial based death, and it is substantially worse in the manga than it is in the anime, and is substantially worse in the Japanese version of the anime than it is in the American version of the anime. See, because of censorship rules in America, the blood that flies out of this sand burial release is black. However, in the Japanese version, it's red. And thus, essentially, one of the first things that we ever see Gaara do is literally juice another Genin in a test where he's not supposed to kill other people, and he destroys his body with such a ridiculous amount of force that it launches all of his blood out of the sand burial into a barrage of rain that Gaara hides from using the umbrella of that now dead Rain Shinobi. The irony here being that that Rain Village Shinobi has now been turned into Blood Rain. And immediately upon realizing, after seeing one of their comrades turned into juice, that they were egregiously outmatched, the two Genin that were with this Genin who just got turned into freshly squeezed tomato juice beg for their life and try to hand over their scroll. However, because Gaara didn't get enough of a fight out of the first Genin, he kills them as well. And it's really not until this moment that we realize how terrifying other villages can be. And maybe more importantly than that, how terrifying other Genin can be. And thus, while this is one of the darkest moments in all of Naruto, it did a fantastic job in setting up Gaara as one of the primary antagonists of the Chunin exam arc. But since we're talking about gruesome deaths, let's get to our number 9 spot, because coming up at number 9 on our list of Naruto's darkest moments, ranked and explained, we have Shisui's death. Now listen, I know what some of you are saying. Nick, Shisui's death isn't really all that gruesome. He kind of just launches himself into a waterfall. And you're right, in the anime, that is what he does. However, I'm not just talking about Shisui's death, and I'm certainly not just talking about Shisui's death in the anime. I'm talking about all of the events that led up to Shisui's death, and also all tellings of Shisui's death. Because, well, yes, Shisui yoinking out his last remaining eye and calling down a crow and shoving that eye into a crow and telling that crow to follow Itachi around for the rest of his days is pretty gruesome in itself. There's also so much more going on in the sequence. See, Shisui's death begins, if you read the light novels, with him being paralyzed by a member of the Aburame, so that Danzo can capitalize on the opportunity to yank out one of Shisui's Kodomatsukame against his will, in hopes to not only eliminate an alternative way to quell the Uchiha Haku, but also as a way to kickstart his collection of Uchiha Sharingan. However, because of the shock of having one of his eyes ripped out of his face by the Shadow Hokage, Shisui is able to flee from the scene. Flee back to Itachi, who he was supposed to be meeting with after his meeting with Danzo. And while, yes, a lot of people would say you can live with one eye, unfortunately for Shisui, not only was he paralyzed by Yoji Aburame, he was also poisoned by Yoji Aburame. And therefore, on top of yanking out his last remaining eye and shoving it into the face of a crow and launching himself into a waterfall to supposedly die, in the light novel we learn that Shisui also had to tell Itachi to kill him. See, because Shisui understood because of the poison in his body, he was going to die. And therefore, if he was going to die anyways, it was best that he died at the hands of his best friend, who could use his death as a way to awaken his own Mangekyo Sharingan. Information that Shisui knew about on account of the fact that he was the youngest person to ever awake his Mangekyo Sharingan, because when he was just 7 years old, he let his best friend die out of jealousy while out on a mission. And thus, Shisui's death isn't just about him being poisoned and losing both of his Kodomatsukame, it's about a 13-year-old having to cut down his best friend and the person who incentivized him to spy on the Uchiha, because the person he had been spying on the Uchiha for, Danzo, had decided that Shisui, and therefore by extension probably Itachi, had outrun their usefulness. It's the conclusion of a story of two talented children being used and abused by the system that they were trying to help. And in the final moments of Shisui, as possibly a final apology to Itachi for pulling him into this life, he decided to give his life for Itachi to increase his own power, in hopes that maybe, just maybe, this increase of power would stop Itachi from being abused by the very system that had killed Shisui. But since we're talking about killing kids, let's get to our number 8 spot. Because coming up at number 8 on our list of Naruto's darkest moments, ranked and explained, we have Gaara's death via extraction. See, well, yes, basically every single Jinchuriki leading up to the 4th Great Shinobi World War was killed via tailed beast extraction. We really only got to see the entirety of that process when that extraction happened to Gaara. Mostly because Gaara was the most important Jinchuriki that ever had his tailed beast extracted by the Akatsuki. Naruto had his extracted by Madara. However, the way that the Akatsuki had to go about extracting tailed beasts from Jinchuriki was brutal. It was a days-long process that required all the members of the Akatsuki to come back to their hideout to combine their chakra in the incredibly arduous task of undoing a Jinchuriki's seal and pulling their tailed beast into the ghetto statue. However, because of how long this process takes, we as viewers and readers had a fair amount of hope that Gaara could be saved. I mean, that would just make sense, right? I mean, he's the Kazekage, he hasn't been the Kazekage that long, he went through this whole character arc of being the villain, and now he's a good guy, and he's finally just started to improve the relationship that he has with Shukaku. We can't kill him off right now. Unless we can. And thus, after Gaara is defeated in battle by Deidara, who exposes Gaara's weakness of needing to protect the Sand Village, Gaara's taken into custody by the Akatsuki. And slowly but surely, we see his soul being ripped out of him. An unconscious Gaara floating in the air with his blue aura being pulled out of him like he's fighting against Hiruzen. And thus, for the entirety of Gaara's extraction, we were on the edge of our seats as we watched one of our favorite characters literally die in front of us. And yet, even though Konoha was making a very concerted effort to try and save Gaara's life, as the Akatsuki continued the extraction of Shukaku, it became increasingly clear that Gaara may not make it. And eventually, that's exactly what happened. Gaara, a character that we've known since the very earliest days of Naruto, is literally killed in front of us. After several torturous days of having the tailed beast that he just began to connect with yanked out of him. It's horrifying, it's dark, and it gives us a look into what the Akatsuki had to do to all of the other Jinchuriki. See, because, well, yes, Gaara dying in this moment is dark enough by itself. By giving us a look into what this process is like, we're also able to apply what this process is like to other Jinchuriki, like Fu or Han, and imagine the torturous circumstances that they all had to be put in. And while, yes, in the end, Gaara is saved by Granny Chiyo giving up her life for his, a lot of Naruto fans had to watch their comfort character slowly but surely be killed over the course of several episodes. And that was just as torturous to them as it was to Gaara. But enough about all these moments from Naruto's manga. See, because Naruto's manga, its original source material, wasn't the only place that we got very dark moments from this IP. Sometimes additional moments that were added in Naruto's anime did a great job of making this universe just a little bit of a darker place. And in no case is that more true than with our number 7 spot. Because coming up at number 7 on our list of Naruto's darkest moments ranked and explained, we have Karin's childhood. See, Karin is one of those characters that the manga doesn't tell us a whole lot about. Basically, all the manga tells us about her is that at one point in time, she was the warden of one of Orochimaru's prisons, and when Orochimaru wanted to slap together heavy for Sasuke, he called on her because of her healing ability, fully understanding that she would keep Sasuke alive. And when Sasuke is your only shot at a perfect vessel, yeah, that's kind of the person you want to keep alive. However, Naruto's anime gave us much more of a look into Karin's backstory. And it's horrific. See, Karin is obviously a long-lost member of the Uzumaki, and therefore her family's lineage wasn't caught up in the Uzumaki massacre. Now, that's because Karin's family didn't live in the village hidden in the whirlpool, and rather they lived in the Land of Grass. However, because the Land of Grass was a small nation, often caught between two much bigger warring nations, the shinobi of the Land of Grass usually found themselves getting destroyed by superior fighting forces, and therefore they often needed healing. Healing that Karin's mother would usually have to do for the entire village, because she wasn't able to hide her lineage as an Uzumaki. And therefore, whenever the relatively small village that Karin and her mother lived in got involved in any kind of combat, after the fight was over, Karin's mother would be forced, against her will, to heal all of the injured shinobi. This was viewed as essentially Karin's mother's job, the thing that allowed for her and her daughter to stay within the confines of this village. However, one day after a particularly egregious defeat, Karin's mother was pushed to her brink. Too many shinobi bit into her, draining away her chakra life force, until eventually she was literally tapped out of all of her chakra and killed from all of the healing she had to do. Now, in essence, the themes that are being built upon here are very clearly SA. Karin's mother, a woman, is being forced into healing all of these men against her will, even though it drains her of her life force. It hurts to be bit. It hurts to have your chakra drained, and yet she's forced to do it because that's her ability. And eventually she's forced to do it at such a scale that it literally kills her. Now, one would assume that maybe this small village would identify after killing its one healer that this really isn't the way that they should be treating these Uzumaki. But no. See, because rather than reflecting upon what they just did to this poor woman, Karin's village decided now that her mother was gone, she was gonna have to step up and replace her. And thus for years, Karin, a child, was used as a sacrificial lamb, allowing her life force to be taken by all of the injured shinobi of her village in order to ensure that she could continue to live there. And thus Karin, a child, had to use her body to remain in the village. That is until, of course, she's discovered by Orochimaru and taken away from that dreadful situation. situation. Yeah, it's actually not so often that you could say that going to live with Orochimaru was an upgrade. But this is why I have such a complicated relationship with Naruto's filler, because while sometimes Naruto's filler revolves around a ninja ostrich and a bunch of nonsense, other times it introduces some of the most devastatingly well-written backstories we've seen in Naruto, the manga very much included. But since we're talking about Orochimaru and all of their labs, we should get to our number 6 spot, because coming up at number 6 on our list of Naruto's darkest moments, right and explained, we have Orochimaru's lab scene. Now, obviously, me saying Orochimaru's lab scene could refer to basically anything. Orochimaru's in their lab like all the time. However, I'm referring to one specific sequence. One of the first times we ever get to peep into one of Orochimaru's labs and what it would look like when Orochimaru was running a lab that they believed had no chance of ever being discovered. See, because relatively early on in Naruto, that is to say when Orochimaru launches the Konoha Crush, we get a peep into Orochimaru and Hiruzen's backstory, where we learn that Hiruzen walks around with a massive amount of shame on account of the fact that when he discovered Orochimaru's human experimentation lab inside of Konoha, he was unable to stop him. And while the sequence is relatively bad in the anime, it's horrific in the manga. See, I had that entire video talking about the censorship between Naruto's manga and its anime. And in terms of prevalent differences between Naruto's manga and anime, this is one of the clearest cut examples of heavy censorship. See, because in the sequence where we see Hiruzen stumbling into Orochimaru's human experimentation lab in the anime, well, yes, dozens of people are chained to the walls. Those dozens of people are not bloodied. They just seem to be unconscious. But in the manga, while there's still dozens of people chained to the walls, these dozens of people are cut into pieces, bleeding from their stomachs, completely naked. While some are hanging from their arms like they are in the anime, some are hanging from their neck. In the manga, it is incredibly evident that Orochimaru has been experimenting on and killing these human test subjects. Well, in the anime, it just seems though Orochimaru has a bunch of people hostage. Now, I think this is objectively one of the dumbest moments of censorship we've ever seen between the Naruto manga and anime, because the entire point of showing this backstory is to show the reality that Hiruzen was slapped in the face with when he finally stumbled upon what Orochimaru was doing in the dark. And censoring that moment takes away some of the punch of what Hiruzen had to go through. But still, we had seen plenty of gore and guts and blood in Naruto up until this moment, but never necessarily on this scale. This is also very much more so in the manga, painted as one of Hiruzen's most colossal failures as not only a father figure, but also as the Hokage, as is something that he allowed to happen with not only a child he raised, but also within the confines of his village. And thus, while the sheer shock factor of this sequence is enough to land at a spot on this list, the emotional weight of the sequence not only allows for us to understand that Orochimaru has been evil for quite some time, but also allows us to understand that Hiruzen is just a man. Not the god of Shinobi that he was hailed to be in the early days of Naruto, but a man who had unfortunately failed somebody he was meant to raise. And thus, for all those reasons, this sequence gets our number 6 spot. But there's a big difference between one panel showing a couple dozen people slightly cut up and several panels showing one guy getting blown to smithereens, which is why at number 5 on our list of Naruto's darkest moments, ranked and explained, we have Hidan's death. Now listen, I understand. Plenty of you enjoyed Hidan's death. I know I did. However, just because we enjoyed something doesn't mean it wasn't incredibly dark. See, well, yes, of course, Hidan's death is probably the greatest moment of exacting revenge in all of Naruto. That doesn't mean what we saw Shikamaru do to Hidan wasn't kind of messed up. See, because Shikamaru, after watching Hidan murder his sensei and one of his most important father figures, Asuma, Shikamaru spends a couple of weeks planning on how to kill the immortal. And the plan that he ends up coming up with includes running Hidan out into the center of the woods, digging a big old hole, and tying a bunch of explosive tags to even more wire. And thus, after Shikamaru is able to enact his plan, that is to say, after he's able to drag Hidan all the way into the Nara forest, where he's dug a gigantic hole surrounded by explosive tags that he binds to Hidan's body, we watch Shikamaru, after lighting a phantom cigarette for his now past sensei, throw Asuma's lighter onto Hidan's explosive tag-covered body, blowing the immortal into hundreds of bits. Hundreds of bits that fall into a now rapidly filling hole as Hidan's decapitated skull curses at Shikamaru. And all the while, as Hidan, who's still very much alive, is screaming at Shikamaru, we see more and more rubble falling onto his body, and most importantly, his face, with one of the goriest, at least to me, because I hate eyeball stuff, moments in all of Naruto happening as Hidan screams at Shikamaru. A large rock hits him on the eye and makes his eye go lazy, very clearly depicting that Hidan's orbital bone has been shattered and he no longer has the ability to direct his eyeball. And yet still, he screams at Shikamaru, telling him that he'll chew his way out of this hole. And thus, while this sequence is obviously incredibly badass, it's also incredibly gory, and the subcontext of it is kind of nuts when you consider the fact that it's kind of being implied that Hidan is going to be stuck in this hole forever. See, because while we don't know all that much about Joshinism, and therefore we don't know if Hidan will die if he stops giving offerings over to Lord Joshin, it's not crazy to assume that Hidan's going to have to exist for eternity in this hole as a set of hundreds of parts. And even if Hidan is to die because of his lack of offerings to Lord Joshin, then what we're watching is the death of an immortal character, scorned by the god that had granted them the ability of eternal life. And both of those conclusions are pretty metal. But a sequence doesn't always have to include death to be considered dark, like with our number 4 spot. Because coming up at number 4 on our list of Naruto's darkest moments ranked and explained, we have Sasuke stabbing through Karin. See, Sasuke over the course of the entirety of Shippuden is a really bad guy. And while he does a lot of really bad things, one of the worst things that he ever does happens during his battle against Danzo. See, towards the end of Sasuke and Danzo's fight, Danzo begins to get desperate, as it becomes more and more increasingly clear that there is a difference in power level between Sasuke and Danzo. And therefore, in a last-ditch attempt to try and save his life, Danzo, who's at the end of his rope, grabs onto Karin and takes her as a hostage, in hopes that Sasuke would hold some kind of sentimental value to a girl that's not only committed herself to saving his life, but also a person who he's been traveling with for a while now. However, Sasuke, who usually does the majority of his horrific things to the women in his life, instead of doing something like trying to cast a genjutsu on Danzo, get a shadow clone behind him, or really just do anything that would involve saving Karin's life, instead uses a Chidori sharp spear to stab through Karin, fatally wounding her in order to hit Danzo. However, fatally wounding Karin with his Chidori sharp spear stab wasn't enough. Directly before he does it, he tells Karin to not move, implying that he's going to try and attack around her to hit Danzo, giving her false hope that she's going to survive this situation. And if literally stabbing her through the heart physically wasn't enough, he decided to take it one step further and stab her through the heart metaphysically by immediately giving a whole speech to Danzo after stabbing him into the heart through Karin's heart, and he doesn't care about that useless woman, and therefore she's useless as a hostage. This moment truly depicted just how far gone Sasuke was and the plot for revenge for Itachi's death. And if it weren't for her own innate healing abilities and Sakura flying in to save her life, Karin undoubtedly would have died here. And the Sasuke would have killed Karin for really no reason. But since we're talking about stabbing people directly through the heart, let's get to our number 3 spot. Because coming up at number 3 on our list of Naruto's darkest moments ranked and explained, we have Kakashi killing Haku. Now listen, I know some of you are saying, oh, Nick, shouldn't this be Kakashi killing Rin? Isn't that a darker moment? Well, kind of, but that moment in itself is surrounded by a bunch of other moments that I would consider darker than the actual act of Kakashi killing Rin, and we're gonna talk about those moments a little bit later on in this list. But for the moment, we're talking about Kakashi killing Haku. See, Kakashi killing Haku is kind of the first dark moment in Naruto's entire story. Well, yes, we have some kind of crazy sequences like Kakashi showing Sakura Sasuke's beaten and broken body in a genjutsu, Kakashi killing the demon brothers after they try to attack him, and Tazuna, the bridge builder, in the first fight against Zabuza. However, it's not really until Kakashi accidentally punches a hole in the chest of a small boy that you realize, oh, okay, so that's what ninjas can do. Now, that's another one of those classic Naruto censorship moments that makes this sequence substantially worse in the manga than it does in the anime. See, because while in the anime, we basically just see Kakashi resting his hand on Haku's chest with a bunch of electricity poking through Haku's body, in the manga, we see Kakashi punch his whole hand through Haku. Like, fist out the back, hand all the way through the body. It's crazy. There's blood everywhere. And well, obviously the sequence of Kakashi accidentally killing a child who gave his life to protect a known criminal who was actively trying to destabilize an entire nation filled with poor tradesmen is dark enough in itself and starts to hit on tones like the fact that anybody can find love in any circumstance, regardless of how morally corrupt those involved might seem. Once you begin to learn Kakashi's backstory and learn this the second time in his life, he's accidentally Chidori'd directly through the chest of a 12-year-old, the sequence gets so much darker. See, not only because Haku was a boy filled with promise and dreams for a better world, who wanted to live alongside Zabuza and probably had every right to do so, however, However, all of those dreams were snatched away as Haku tried to save Zabuza's life from the fatal blow of Kakashi's Chidori, when he realized that this moment was essentially Kakashi reliving the worst day of his life, as he now had the grip of the reality of killing two separate children accidentally with his Chidori. The sequence just gets sad for everyone involved. It's sad for Zabuza, as he has to come to grips with the reality that Haku loved him, and maybe he didn't deserve that love. It's sad for Haku, who snuffs out their incredibly bright potential to try and save somebody who didn't understand that they loved him. And it's sad for Kakashi, who has to relive the worst day of his life that sent his best friend into a spiral that would cause for them to start the fourth great Shinobi World War. And what's worse is that the sequence happens in like chapter 20 of the manga, truly setting the tone for just how dark Naruto could get. But since we're talking about Obito's lowest moments, let's get to our number 2 spot, because coming up at number 2, we have the Uchiha massacre. And maybe more specifically, Itachi forcing Sasuke to watch the death of his parents for 24 hours. See, obviously everything surrounding the Uchiha massacre is incredibly dark. On its face, it is a 13-year-old boy eradicating his entire clan to try and save his little brother. And while, yes, a boy being forced to kill all of his loved ones is a dark thought in itself, when you start to peel back the layers of the Uchiha massacre, it just gets worse and worse. See, the Uchiha massacre only happened because 2 teenagers with an incredible amount of promise were being manipulated by the Shadow Hokage, who technically shouldn't have had any access to them in the first place. And because that Shadow Hokage, and therefore basically the full brunt of Konoha's military might, wanted to take advantage of the Uchiha's powers, that is to say their Sharingans, he forced these 2 boys into spying on their own clan. And when these 2 boys possibly found a way to stop their clan from enacting a coup against Konoha, the Shadow government via Danzo eliminated the possibility of peace by killing Itachi's best friend, then forced Itachi into a situation where he believed that the only way that he could save his little brother's life was to kill everybody else in his clan, his mother and father included. And thus this 13-year-old had to pair up with the man he believed was the ghost of the Uchiha and cut down every fighting man and woman in his clan, while the ghost of the Uchiha killed all the children. And if cutting down everybody he ever knew in order to ensure that there would be a safe place for his brother to live inside of this village one day wasn't enough, he also had to instill into his brother that he needed to hate him, and that hate was the only thing that would stop him from being placed in a situation like he was currently stuck in. And thus, after having to execute his own parents, he used his newfound Mangekyo Sharingan ability that he got from killing his own best friend, who was killed by the man who thrust him into this position right now, to force his little brother to relive Itachi killing his parents for 24 hours. All in all, the Uchiha massacre and everything that surrounds it is one of the darkest things ever displayed in anime. And because of that, it gets our number 2 spot. But to me, the Uchiha massacre still does not touch our number 1 spot, because coming up at number 1, we have Obito's I'm in hell. See, I told you we're going to talk about Rin's death at some point, and that's because Rin's death and everything that surrounds it, I believe, is genuinely the darkest moment in Naruto. See, consider the fact that the Hidden Mist Village abducted a child, forcibly put a tailed beast inside of her that she was not compatible with hopes that tailed beast would burst out of her inside of Konoha, leading to a rampage that would destroy a fair amount of Konoha and very much kill that false Jinchuriki, is not even the darkest details surrounding the events we're about to talk about tells you how messed up all of this really is. See, because, well, yes, the Hidden Mist did abduct a child and did basically make that child into a walking bomb that was going to detonate in the center of one of the most heavily populated places in the entirety of the Ninja Continent. Unfortunately for the Hidden Mist, very fortunately for Konoha, that walking bomb, when identifying the fact that one of her closest friends wasn't going to be able to fight all of the Anbu that were currently surrounding them, decided to throw herself in front of the Chidori of Kakashi, and Kakashi being forced against his will to kill one of his best friends. And while yes, technically this was the right thing to do for everybody, unfortunately Kakashi and Rin weren't around to explain it to Obito, who was watching from afar. And thus, upon seeing Kakashi kill Rin for seemingly no reason, Obito awoke to his Mangekyo Sharingan, which also caused Kakashi to awake to his. In using his newfound Kamui abilities and White Zetsu body, Obito would proceed to go on a rampage against the dozens of Mist Anbu who are currently surrounding Rin and Kakashi, tearing them apart in one of the most vicious battle sequences maybe ever depicted in anime, certainly depicted in Naruto. And this is one of the rare circumstances that is substantially worse in the anime than it is in the manga, because the anime has voice acting. And the screams you hear from Mist Ombu as they try to land decisive blows on Obito just to phase through him, while Obito slashes out their insides with wood release in his white Zetsu body, are legitimately haunting. And by the end of the fight, Obito has literally made a lake of blood. And as the blood rains down on him, he opens up his white Zetsu mask and says the iconic line, "I'm in hell." And thus, considering the fact that a literal ocean of blood is made over the course of this battle, and this battle begins with a child bomb being murdered by another child, yeah, I'm gonna say it's the darkest moment in all of Naruto. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. What do you think is the darkest moment in Naruto? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go see what those Molsuits are all about.